Okay, so as you just found out, I'm going to be talking about out-of-body experiences today. And if you heard my talk last year, I went into a lot of the metaphysics, a lot of the Seth quotes. This year, I'm going to be going into a very practical guide in terms of the experience. But just to keeping in theme with the conference, I wanted to go into one Seth quote to begin. And this is a quote talking about the outer senses and the inner senses. And so this is from early sessions 2, and Seth is saying, this arbitrary limitation set upon the individual self is put upon it by its reliance upon the outer senses as a method of perceiving reality. The outer senses are excellent tools of perception for limited circumstances. However, man has relied upon them so long and with such cringing dependence that now they threaten to hamper his own growth and development. So, what this quote is helping us to see is that I feel like we really are at a crossroads as a species, as people, as individuals, also as a society at large. I really feel like we're at a pivotal time on our planet today. And I feel that many probabilities are open to us, many probable versions of self-development. And one of those probabilities that I'm really passionate about is the opening and the unveiling of the inner senses, because I feel like for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, we've been closing those channels down as we've developed this specialized ego consciousness and our exclusive reliance upon the outer senses. But now we can all pretty much agree we've kind of dialed those outer senses in pretty good, and that we really need to return to a state of opening up those inner channels so that we can come to a greater state of harmony and balance between the inner self and the outer self. So I feel like we're going into a probability, or at least the one that I want to help create here, is to fully learn to use our inner senses and to gain access to many, many more layers of the self than just this ego consciousness that we're so familiar with. And so as we do that, we're going to truly begin to understand the nature of ourselves and the nature of our reality. So with that, I believe that out-of-body experiences are a really powerful step in that direction. I believe that OBEs are one of the powerful ways that we can truly learn to hone and get familiar with and open up those inner senses and enable the ego to begin to rely upon inner data just as much as it relies upon its outer data. So ultimately, I feel like we're heading as a species to a state where we can still rely on the outer senses to give us a clear picture of reality, but then we're also going to open up these inner channels, and then it's ultimately the blending of the two that's going to take us to heights that we've just never even seen before or could even conceive, because it's going to be like this idea of the sum is going to be much greater than any of these parts alone. Previously, we've had cultures that really developed the inner senses, but not so much the outer senses. Our current society is really heavy on the outer senses, but has totally cut off the inner world. And now when we bring those two together, it's just going to light up in a completely new way. So with that, a little bit about me and how I got here. I've always had a really, really deep interest in all things metaphysical, ever since I can remember and being a young child. And so, as I was growing up, I had to integrate my passion, this passion for the metaphysical or the passion for the inner reality and understanding inner perceptions, as well as how to make a livelihood, how to make a living in the world. And so, the perfect medium for that, for me, has been energetic medicine, studying all forms of energetic healing, energetic medicine, acupuncture, Chinese medicine, medical qigong, energy healing, and all kinds of different energy healing modalities. As far as out-of-body experiences, I started having them spontaneously in my early 20s. And they were triggered by two main events. One is they were triggered by specific Qigong practices, standing meditation practices that create a lot of resonance and vibration in your energetic field. And those just basically triggered spontaneous out-of-body experiences. And then also the death of someone that I really cared about caused a real deep inner searching and further spontaneous out-of-body experiences where we would meet in these out-of-body states. And so currently I teach and practice energy medicine in San Jose. All various forms, like I've mentioned, acupuncture, medical qigong, as well as teaching classes in out-of-body as well as energy medicine. So with that, my goal for today is, following a brief introduction to the phenomenon itself, I really want to introduce one method that is a surefire, tested, works for all, no nonsense, practical method of getting out of body. So basically, I want to increase awareness of this simple entry method because I want to make it accessible to more people. I want more people to take part in the experience, not just reading metaphysical literature that describes various states. You want to, I would like for myself to have more personal experience as well as everybody in this room and in this world to take part. And so I want to increase the practice of the phenomenon so that we can corroborate research and basically push the leading edge of what we know about ourselves. And in that sense, I want to get out of the theoretical and dive straight into the experiential, the practical, direct personal experience. Of course, this is a Seth conference, and many of us have been reading Seth material for many, many years. So I feel like the next level for many of us in this room and beyond is basically taking the knowledge and just taking it into a practical, daily experience level. Through the out-of-body experience, we can come to know this material at a much, much deeper level. And so it's one way we can really experience and practice Seth's wisdom, as well as gain access to profound insights and profound states of being. So this year's talk will focus on that direct personal experience and this one method that definitely works based on thousands of people that have tried it, works pretty much for a considerable majority, somewhere upwards of 90% success rate, which is pretty incredible. I'm going to focus on that one method. Last year I focused on a lot of the Seth quotes, a lot of the background. That talk is still available. Many of you have probably seen it on YouTube if you weren't here last year. So that's still available. But this year I'm going to go right into the practical approach. And one thing that I'm really excited about this is because when you start to distill it down into a practical approach, you can actually present it to any type of person with any type of worldview. It doesn't have to just be a person who believes in spirituality or believes in an afterlife. You can take this approach and give it to a scientist and say, hey, it doesn't matter what you believe. You can practice this, have the experience, and you decide for yourself. I mean, the scientist might decide, well, it's just a state of mind. It's a psychological state. When it comes down to the direct personal experience and how it affects your life, it's like, who cares? The point is, it's a profound experience, and however you want to theorize about it, it's still going to dramatically expand your consciousness. So with that, I feel like this particular method is going to be available to a lot of people. Maybe some of us in this room will turn on other people who are more materially oriented to just try the techniques. I think the ultimate goal of a scientist, really, in their heart of hearts, is to explore the unknown. And this is definitely the unknown, and this is definitely, another frontier, perhaps even the last frontier, is to explore ourselves, to explore the inner self. So, with that, just to create a basis of understanding so we're all on the same page, what is an out-of-body experience? It's where your full waking consciousness is outside of your physical body. That kind of makes sense to most people. And so basically you're perceiving reality not through your 5 physical senses, but you're perceiving it through the inner senses while your physical body is at rest and at sleep. And of course there are gradations of waking consciousness, and this is where the definitions can get a little slippery, because some people say, well, is it a type of dream? Is it a type of lucid dream? Is it what kind of experience is this? And so the definitions out there are pretty slippery, and I feel like that's perfectly fine because there is a gradation of consciousness. In practice, you're going to recognize it's not like you can say unconscious dream, lucid dream, out of body. There's like, you have an experience, you write it in a journal, and you're like, well, where does this fit on the continuum? Because it's always a little bit different. However, one thing that's really true is that OBE states in their most full-blown development can feel super, super real, like you're entering a state that even surpasses the reality that you perceive through the 5 physical senses. And I feel like that is an important piece of it to remember, is that something we can work on is not just to have the experience, but then how do you dial it in and make it super real and really gain the full benefit of this experience. And then, of course, there's why practice out-of-body states. There is incredible acceleration of personal development. So no matter what your worldview, one thing you can guarantee is that your worldview is going to expand through this direct experience. And then you get to turn on other portions of the brain. You get to seriously and strongly unlock the intuition and just unlock portions of the brain that perhaps have gone by the wayside for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. Now we can begin to activate those portions. There's this idea of meeting people, meeting deceased relatives or deceased friends, celebrities, masters, dead or alive. And so this is where, if you get into the spiritualist worldview, of course you can take it at face value. If you're going on a more scientific mind frame, the point is you're still creating this really vivid and rich experience. And whether you say it's all in the mind or whether you say it's an actual tangible reality, I think is a point that doesn't matter so much because the experience itself is ultimately what matters. And so this kind of brings me to my next point, and we've even talked about it at lunch briefly. All of you can probably remember the holodeck on Star Trek and have probably influenced by that kind of thinking in one way or another. The truth is, through out-of-body experiences, we can enter a state of consciousness that's exactly like the holodeck and far more fascinating than any science fiction movie could depict, because you enter a reality that feels every bit as real as physical, and sometimes even feels super real. And you get to have and play out various experiences within this creation. So in that sense, you can travel anywhere in the world or anywhere in the universe, as well as travel anywhere in time. Another aspect that is really powerful, and of course an interest to me because I work within the healing arts, is you have the capacity to access tremendous healing energy to heal both the body and the mind. There's also the possibility or the potential of using these states to help people rehabilitate various disabilities and injuries. You can enter the out-of-body state and train very specific skills, such as martial arts, surfing, any kinds of sports, and so on. You get to train your mind in reality creation. This is probably one of my favorite. There's just nothing more satisfying than to be in a fully vivid state and to actually, with your mind, create, materialize objects, and then with your mind, dematerialize them, and then recreate other objects. It's an incredibly fantastic state of mind to experience. And from there, of course, it's an alternative to various mind-altering drugs, virtual reality, video games, and so forth, as well as a potential rite of passage. I think, and I feel that a lot of people in our society, especially the young ones coming up, sometimes are searching for something that's a little bit beyond the physical, or perhaps they feel like the system of beliefs that they've been indoctrinated into feel a little bit constricting. So especially around the time of adolescence, there's this idea of wanting more, wanting to discover more and knowing there's more, but it's like there's more to reality than you've been told that there is. And I think there's a lot of searching around that age, and I feel that out-of-body experience could be a potential of a type of rite of passage or a way of helping people discover just more, that there's much more to reality than they have to that point confronted. And last but not least, provide an outlet for the disabled. So can you imagine if you or someone you love is disabled and they've kind of given up on life or have a life that's very severely restricted in an outward physical sense? This is a mind training that can be offered to people so they can regain a sense of joy and have something to work on, to experience, and to create within their lives. So the reason why I introduced this talk with going over all the possibilities is because to get anybody to practice, you kind of have to rev up the desire portion of the equation, because ultimately it's strong desire that then is going to lead to strong intent, and then that strong intent is going to lead to actually focusing on the technique that I'm going to present, and hopefully some of you, most of you, ideally all of you, go home and try it. Tomorrow, perhaps we'll have a discussion and share some nice experiences with each other. In terms of references, I'm going to pull a lot of the information I've gathered for this technique from a book called The Phase by Michael Rautiga. It's one of the better books on out of body that I've read, and definitely comes highly recommended. In that book and in many other books, they kind of break them down to certain types of techniques for getting in. The one we're going to spend a lot of time on today is the indirect method. But there's also a direct method, which tends to be quite a bit more difficult for more people. And then besides that, there's dream conversion. And the dream conversion is just like it sounds. You're converting a dream to an out-of-body experience. That tends to be kind of somewhere in the middle. But by and large, based on a lot of research, the indirect method is totally the most effective, the most accessible, the easiest for the majority of people to experience. So that's why we're going to focus on that particular method. So like I said earlier, the indirect method has up to a 90% success rate for those who implement it in their lives. That's pretty good statistics. And besides that, it's also very logical. It's very methodical. It has a very specific algorithm of very specific techniques that have proven highly effective over time. And so for those of you who are very mathematical in mind, are going to find this incredibly easy to apply. And the idea is that when you follow the algorithm, that's when the magic happens. And this technique uses your natural 24-hour cycle, so you're not interjecting too much out of the ordinariness into your otherwise normal cycle. You don't have to fast for 36 hours or do anything crazy or esoteric. It's just, you're just barely tweaking your 24-hour cycle, and you're catching the state of mind that's most ideal and conducive to out-of-body experience. So the techniques are applied upon waking from sleep. And the idea is we're going to catch the mental mind in its most ideal state and then boom, take it off and go running from there. So a brief outline of the technique is we're going to break sleep up into two portions. You're going to have your first sleep, which tends to be your deeper sleep. It lasts about 6 hours, and you can play with that a little bit. You can make it 7 hours, make it 5 hours. You're going to do some tweaking on your own, but 6 hours is a good base to start with. And then you either set an alarm to ring after 6 hours, or if you're one of those people that can just kind of program yourself to get up, that you just do that. The idea is from there you get up for 3 to 50 minutes, and then you do anything simple like go to the bathroom, you might read a book, something simple, keeping yourself awake for that period of time. And then for the second sleep, you go back to sleep basically for as long as possible. For most of us, that's going to be 2 more hours of sleep. And then subsequently, each awakening within your second sleep, you're going to make attempts. And I'm going to describe in acute detail what those attempts look like. So as most of you know, your first sleep is considerably deep, and there's very little REM sleep. I'm going to show a chart a little bit later on, but you just briefly come up into REM sleep and then drop back down into deep sleep. So that is not the most useful time to be bringing conscious awareness into our sleeping states. However, the second sleep becomes much more shallow, has much more REM sleep there, which makes it much more accessible to this type of experience. And so we're going to work exclusively with that second block of sleep to create the experience. So like I said earlier, the focus of the method is definitely upon each awakening. So you kind of have to defer the gratification. A lot of people kind of want to, go into some meditative state and go out of body. In this case, you're totally deferring your effort all the way until the morning. And basically what you're doing is, as you enter the hypnopompic state, the state that is leading you out of sleeping and into waking, as you enter that state, you're going to learn to catch it and make your projection attempts from there. We're catching that hypnopompic state. I like to refer to it as that in-between state, in between sleeping and waking. It's definitely the most ideal platform from which to launch your out-of-body. And our goal is going to be, in our second sleep, to awaken without movement. This is really the key. And as you awaken without movement, you're going to want to capture this in-between state and project from there. And of course, luckily, if we find ourselves too awake, then there's techniques to induce, to go back into the in-between state so that we can project. So the idea is, in the second sleep, you're going to find yourself having many, many awakenings. So you have many attempts each morning, which is kind of nice. So, you don't have to put your, like a lot of angst into this because there's so much opportunity. Now with practice and focus, you're going to be you can get really good at catching that in-between state. What usually happens is most people are coming into consciousness and just pass like right through it without even taking a pause to slow down. It's just, most people are just trained, you just kind of catapult into wakefulness, start thinking about your problems, what you got to do that day. Perhaps you're usually waking up to an alarm, and you're just like, get up and go, where's my coffee, right? So with this method, you want to set aside enough time so that you can have that second sleep without this like, okay, I need to get somewhere. Some of you, that means you'll have to practice on the weekends. Others of you who can arrange your life in such a way, you can start your things a little bit later, leaving some space for this method. But the idea is this hypnopompic state, I like to call it the golden portal, because I think that summarizes how precious it is. It really has just such incredible value. So here's a nice chart depicting the levels of sleep. This isn't broken up into the two segments of sleep, but your second sleep would be somewhere over here. So as you can see, as the night progresses, first you have a very deep sleep, and then it gets more and more shallow, and so here's where all our attempts are going to be taking place. Right when your waking consciousness and your sleeping consciousness confuse into one, it's a very powerful state. So let's get into some of the nitty-gritty details. This method is going to consist of separation attempts and then techniques to get you back into the in-between state if you've waken up too much. So the idea is, first of all, you're going to, upon awakening, hopefully without movement, right then and there, you're going to make a separation attempt. Before doing any technique, anything else, you try and make an intention, you're going to separate. So that ideally you're waking up without movement. We're going to learn that isn't, it's critical, but if you wake up with movement, there's tips and tricks for that, of course. Now, you want to train yourself such that your first thought upon awakening is going to be to make the attempt. And you're going to, the first couple of times, you're going to just kind of pass right through the state and be like, oh, right, I was supposed to make attempts. Don't worry about that. Like, after a little bit of intention, after a little bit of putting some time into it, you're going to find yourself catching that state more and more and more. And as you create that momentum and the excitement, then it's going to take off from there. So the idea is, within the first 5 seconds of waking up, you're going to spend about 5 seconds making an attempt to project. And I'm going to explain those methods in just a little bit. But basically, you use that window and you spend very little of time. It's very easy to tell whether it's going to be successful or no, it's not going to happen. And here's how you do it. All of you are probably familiar with this. You're all Seth readers. But just to go over it really quickly, some of the 3 primary ones used by the majority of people are levitation, rolling out, and getting up. Levitation tends to be a little bit more advanced. Don't let that scare you. I think we should all try to levitate out of the body, because sometimes it's going to be easy, sometimes it's going to be a little more challenging. And then, so basically you try levitation, you will yourself up towards the ceiling, you see it's not working, that's okay. You try to roll out of the body, rolling your etheric body out. This one is relatively effective for a larger number of people. And you're going to tell immediately too, like, okay, I can tell something's happening, then you keep working it. If nothing's happening, that's okay, you try just getting up. This is the easiest method because it mimics what the physical actions that we're so used to in waking life. You just try to get up out of the body and will yourself out. And then again, if that's not working, that's okay, because there's more bags, there's more tricks in your bag. So you just spend 5 seconds to make the attempt. And what's really interesting is actually about 50% of the experiences that work using this method is if you try to separate right then and there upon awakening. So with that, it's definitely important to mention, besides the fact that you have many more tricks that I'm going to explain next, you also get to awaken many times during that shallow period of sleep within your second sleep. So you might have 3, 5, 6, 7 attempts chances. So you kind of don't sweat the small stuff. You just keep trying, and eventually you get it. Now there's this idea of cycling techniques, and I'm going to break this down. First, I'm going to go into the techniques, and then I'm going to explain what cycling means. So they're, as I said earlier, designed to produce this in-between state, the state that's ideal for projection. And the in-between state is actually very, very easy to create or to recreate during that last 2 hours of sleep. You kind of, even though you think you might have come in quite a bit awake, you're still kind of hinging in between realities. And if you apply these techniques, it's pretty easy to just drop back just a little bit right into that ideal state. So the ideal is that you would, of course, awake without motion, and then we're going to look at what the actual techniques are in just a little bit of time. So the idea is I'm going to, when I list them, the list is going to be just partial. There's 7 of them that I'm going to list. There's many more, but you're going to pick like 2 or 3 of your favorite ones out of them to make attempts. And just keep in the back of your mind that the techniques I'm going to present, you're going to also try for about 5 seconds. If it doesn't work, you let it go. Try the next one. 5 seconds, doesn't work, let it go. Try the third one, again, let it go. And then repeat. You have cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, technique 1, technique 2, technique 3. So you basically just keep trying in different ways, and eventually one of them, there's a very high probability one of them is going to start working and you're going to catch the right mind state and the right space to project from. So the power of this rhythm is going to be all about the cycling. So we're going to get into the cycling, but first, let's talk about each individual technique. This one is one of my favorite. It's called phantom wiggling. The thing with phantom wiggling is that you're lying in your bed, you've just woken up, hopefully without movement, and you just gently bring yourself into a relaxed state. Of course, when you awaken, it bears repeating. You first try the projection. It's not working, immediately go to techniques. So this could be, say, technique 1. You're lying there, and how this works is you start, I like to use the hands. You can use your feet or even your head or any body part. But the idea is you start imagining phantom movement in your hand or whatever body part you choose. And you start to notice that even though you can leave your physical body, your physical hand completely relaxed, the etheric hand, you start to feel perceptions of motion. And so sometimes the technique's not going to work because maybe you're a little bit too awake. You spend 5 seconds. If it doesn't work, that's fine. Now, if it is working, you're going to start to feel various sensations of the energy body as it starts to move and separate from the physical, and then you know it's working. So the ideal is that you bring it to a state, you amplify it as much as you can, and then you're going to attempt your projection again. Now the second method is rotation. Rotation is this use of your vestibular sense. Most people, when we think of rotation, we're going to think, okay, we're going to be rotating around and visualizing the room. But it's actually more of a feeling technique than a visualization technique. And you imagine, as you're lying in bed, rotating on your head to foot axis, and you're just going to gently start imagining the sensation of rotation. It's a vestibular sense technique rather than a visual imagery technique. Now, some of you are going to be able to kind of turn a full 180 degrees, others of you just a 90 degrees. Some of you will be able to increase that with time. Of course, with practice, everything gets a bit easier. But this is another nice technique to help separate the energy body from the physical. And following that, our third technique, kinesthetic motion. This is also one of my favorites by far. So after awakening and attempting to separate, if it has not been successful, you would vividly imagine yourself performing any kind of movement. And the trick to this is it's got to be movement you're really familiar with. So if you're a jogger, it's going to be jogging. If you're a swimmer, it's got to be swimming. Something either that you're passionate about or something that you kinesthetically can easily recreate in your body because it's something you're familiar with. For myself, since I practice Qigong and some aspects of the martial arts, it becomes very easy for me to just imagine myself doing various Qigong movements because it's something I'm very familiar with. Not only the physical sensation of it, but the energetic sensation. And all of you have something like this. And the idea is you make this as vivid and as real as you can. You want to put your all into each one of these techniques and really get the visual as well as the kinesthetic sensation of that activity. And again, you're going to try this for 5 seconds. If it starts working, you're going to feel some sensation, like some sort of transference of your awareness into that sensation. If it's working, of course, you amplify it. If it's not working within 5 seconds, let it go. On to the next one. Rubbing the hands. So basically, you've all done this when you were cold. You all know the sensation. It's ideal if you place the hands just a little bit above the, the eyebrow. You kind of directs your gaze upward a little bit. You just have the sensation of rubbing your hands. And again, this is basically like a subset of another kinesthetic visual exercise, but it's one that is very, very easy to recreate. Sometimes when nothing else works, this is an amazing entry method. Usually about 2 to 4 inches in front of your face and about eye level. You want the hands or a little bit above. And make it, you put your all into the technique. Now, one more. Observing images. This is a little bit more visual in nature. Of course, you've awakened hopefully without movement, and now you've attempted to separate. Now you've gone into techniques. One of your techniques is observing images. So you basically close your eyes are closed, and you just start to peer out into the void, and you just see what's there. You're not necessarily trying to create anything. You're just kind of seeing what's there. Oftentimes, those of you who've passed through the hypnagogic state or the hypnopompic state, you're probably very familiar that there's just certain states where just imagery just comes without even you trying hard. And oftentimes, as you wake up in your second sleep, this becomes a very easy technique. You just close your eyes and start to see visuals. Now, it's sometimes when you see visuals, you'll have a tendency to like, zoom in on it. Actually, what you want to do is kind of allow the imagery to take place, and you take a step back, as if you're like a wide-angle photographer. You're going to take in the scenery versus trying to get into the detail. You'll find that as you step back from the imagery, they become more lucid, versus if you kind of try to go in there, like that's when they kind of tend to disappear. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And so the imagery, if you do get imagery, you just keep working with it, allowing it to come. It's like you're tuning your radio dial into a certain mind frequency, and you'll find them getting more and more vivid, and then you can attempt your separation from there. Of course, within 5 seconds, if it doesn't work, you can just go on to the next one. This one is called peering. This is another one that's very, very easy to do. After awakening and attempting to separate, if it has been unsuccessful, you're going to imagine yourself kinesthetically and visually holding an object in your hand. Sometimes this is called the cell phone technique because in this day and age, what's the one object you hold in your hand all the time? So you want to choose an object that you're super familiar with visually. We like to stare at our phones, and certainly we know how they feel. So cell phone is the common one that you just start to imagine like you're holding it in front of your face, 2 to 4, 6 inches away, and just kind of imagine it there. And what happens is if there's success, it just starts to materialize right in front of you, and that obviously the technique's working. You amplify it, and then you attempt your projection from there. Of course, if within 5 seconds it doesn't work, the great thing about this is you're just going to cycle on to the next one. I think this is going to be the last one. This is called listening in. Those of you who have had out-of-body experiences are probably well aware of the various vibrational sounds and the strange sounds that correspond to this in-between state of consciousness. In this technique, what you do is just start to really listen in to that sound within your head. And even if there seems like there's no sound, just the pure intention of just like, okay, now I'm listening in, you're in that in-between state, you'll be surprised how easily sounds just start to materialize. And of course, as you get the sound, you just kind of hone in on it, play with it. You'll notice your awareness of it shifts it around a little bit. You kind of play with its feel, its vibration, its tone, the sound and its resonance and response to your consciousness. And eventually you work it up to a high degree and boom, attempt your separation from there. That covers 7 different techniques for reintroducing your consciousness to the in-between state, ideal for projections. And I've already been explaining it in terms of cycles. So the cycle basically is that you slap 2 to 4 of these techniques together. If you can start with 2, maybe go to 3. It's nice to have a variety because you're gonna see that you're not going to respond to one of them, but then you use another one and you're like, boom, you're just right out. And this is why this technique works for so many people, is because you cycle through so many potential doorways and that eventually one of them is going to work. It's like behind this door, no, behind this door, no. And you just keep going, boom, and you're off and running. So that's what makes this technique really work well. So an example of a cycle would be pairing, for example, phantom wiggling with your peering, with your rotation. You do that for a cycle, nothing works, you cycle again for up to 4 cycles. Now, Here's a quick example of what that might look like. So, okay, you're awakening. You just come up into consciousness. You're in your second sleep, and you immediately start to separate. You make an attempt. You do rolling out. You try getting up. You try levitation. Let's say none of that works. Okay, no problem. You immediately begin one of those techniques. Now, the trick is it's 5 seconds only. If it's not working within 5 seconds, boom, you go off and running into the next technique. And so naturally by now you've chosen a 2 to 4 technique cycle that you're going to work with. And then again, if this first cycle does not work, you're going to repeat it for 4 times. And so this is very much, think of this in terms of an algorithm. The more mathematical and methodical you get with this, the more success you get. So the success, in other words, depends really on following the instructions. It always amazes me, I teach for a living, how much I teach something and how much it gets reinvented. And so it's always good to come back to the techniques, to the process. I'm going to make this available for everybody. Always recheck the algorithm, because there's something about that, and it's been tested by so many people with so much success. It's definitely something worth putting your focus into. So naturally, just remembering, if a technique does not work, you just cycle back into the next round of cycles. With that, believe it or not, this entire process is going to take you about 1 minute. So it's very short. So you come out of sleep, you're in that in-between state, make your attempts for 1 minute, you don't hassle it, you go back to sleep. It's a very kind of a no-nonsense approach. And then you get to try again. You might get to try 3 times that morning, 5 times, because in that shallow sleep you have many opportunities coming. So if it's not successful within that 1 minute, you just go back to sleep, you set a clear intention, you're going to try the next time. You're going to have so many opportunities that you just, you don't want to sweat it. It's going to come in its own time. So here's kind of a more in-depth attempt, taking it all the way from when you first go to sleep all the way to a successful attempt. So obviously we're going to choose an arbitrary time. Let's say midnight. You go to sleep. That's your first sleep. It's your deep sleep. You don't necessarily going to make attempts there, because as you already know, there's not much REM sleep there, and you're going into some really deep phases of sleep. So you're going to get up to your alarm, or if you're one of those people that just can program yourself, great. Stay up for 3 to 50 minutes, and then you're going to go back to sleep with the intention of making attempts during that second sleep upon each awakening. Something you can also play with is actually moving to another location. This is something I love to play with because it sets another layer of intention. Because as I'm coming awake in this other location, like I have this incredibly comfortable couch that I like to move to. And so I can also regulate it with, in all kinds of ways. If I'm really groggy, I might make it a little more, upright. If I'm feeling pretty awake, I can put it back because I know I'm going to maintain a little more consciousness. But this is totally an auxiliary part of the process. You can just stay in your own bed if you so choose. And then the idea is, within your second sleep, then you're going to wake up without movement, immediately attempt your separation. No success in 5 minutes means you start cycling the techniques. So you try your first cycle, phantom wiggling, 5 seconds, nothing works. You go into peering, 5 seconds, nothing works. Rotation, 5 seconds, nothing works. All right, so second cycle. Phantom wiggling, peering, rotation. Third cycle, phantom wiggling. Oh my God, you start to feel sensation. And we're going to talk what those sensations feel like. But you get the sense of, it's working. So you go with it. And here's the trick. You don't want to get too excited, because that's going to bump you out of that state of mind. So you have to really kind of, chill and be easy about all of it. But at the same time, you want to seize that moment, seize that opportunity, and really start amplifying the movement. You're doing phantom wiggling, so you're just increasing the amplitude. And when you get it up to a certain kind of peak, that's when you attempt the separation all over again. You've got your levitation, you've got your rolling out, you've got your getting up. And if there's no success in the separation, you can go back to the technique that was working and retry several times. And you might find second, third time you actually pop into the out-of-body state. Or you can just say, okay, not this time, that's okay, I'll go back to sleep. It's important to stay with the technique that is working. Sometimes people make the mistake of cycling past the technique that's working, and we're going to talk about common mistakes in a little bit. Obviously, if there's success, or if there's no success, you can still retry. you'll find that once you have an out of body, you return to the body. You can have 3, 4, 5 more out of bodies within that morning if you realize that you can just simply keep making attempts. So each morning is going to provide you with just incredible amount of opportunity, which is one of the reasons why this is so highly successful. Here's a nice chart describing the different states of sleep. So here's your first sleep down here. It's your deep sleep. We're not going to mess around too much with that. Here's your period of wakefulness, your 3 to 50 minutes or thereabouts. And here's your second sleep. This is where all your attempts are going to take place. And for those of you who are visually inclined, I know I am, you can kind of see how many breaks in sleeping you have that you come to wakeful consciousness. Look at all the attempts you can make just in one morning. That's pretty incredible. So obviously that second sleep is used because it is the most shallow, and it's just going to really, really be the most conducive launch pad for all your adventures. Now, common mistakes. One of the most common mistakes is awakening and going directly to cycling techniques. You kind of learn something new. It's like, I want to do this. You wake up and you're like, oh, okay, phantom wiggling, all this. You got to try the separation first because 50% of your success is going to come from that. So just kind of, it's going to take some trial and error, a little bit of intention. You're kind of programming yourself. You'll get the rhythm of it after several days, after a week, after 2 weeks. It's going to kind of sink in, but you're just going to get that intention eventually. Okay, the first thing you do, make your attempts. Because a lot of times you actually wake up in an out-of-body state. Your consciousness is in the body, and all you have to do is just move yourself out. Now, another common mistake is not separating when a technique starts working. It can be kind of easy to get kind of absorbed in the cool imagery and the visuals you're seeing, which that in and of itself is a really fantastic practice. But it's really important that you make an attempt to separate, and then you can take it one step further. Now, another common mistake, like I mentioned just a little bit ago, is switching from a technique that already has begun working, whereas you should really stick with it beyond the 5-second rule and make your attempts from there. And last but not least, not re-entering into the out-of-body state once you've returned to the body. What usually happens is if you're already projecting, you're already in this ideal state, you want to really maximize your return, so to speak. You want to really, you come back from a nice out of body. It's tempting to I'm going to journal it, write it all down, wake yourself up. Oh my God, that was incredible. But you'll be surprised how easily you can slip right back into those out of body states by just saying, okay, I'm back, but I want more. Let's go. So it's good to know. Oh, and there is one more. One last common mistake is just doing the techniques half-heartedly, just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm phantom wiggling. So you want to just like really, really do the technique, like really put your all into it, and you get out of it what you put into it, and that's basically how it works. So with that, now let's focus on signs of success. What happens when a technique starts working? And this is pretty common sense for those of you who are a little more familiar with altered states and meditative states. But basically the technique starts to become super real. Like you start to merge into the technique. Like your phantom wiggling starts to feel like really wiggling. Your kinesthetic motion exercise starts to feel like you really are starting to feel like you're jogging or biking or whatever. Besides that, there's generally an increase in strange, unusual sounds, vibrations felt through the body like electric current, various forms of tingling, buzzing. Sometimes people hear melodies or wind chimes or voices that should not be there, and a physical sense that you're experiencing in this altered state of perception. Of course, imagery, as soon as you start doing the techniques, one of them starts working, even if it's phantom wiggling, you're not even doing a visual technique, you'll start to get imagery and visuals, and that's a clear indication that you're in just the right mind state for projection. Of course, all of these are indicators that you should just immediately separate right then and there. So you get to do your float out, roll out, flip out, whatever your favorite exit technique is. Continuing on with our tips and tricks. Now, if you're a heavy sleeper and you remember that chart I put up here, that 3 to 50 minute window of wakefulness, if you're a heavy sleeper, go a little more towards the 50-minute mark. If you're a light sleeper, make it as short as possible. And that basically is proportional to your ability to easily fall to sleep, or it's difficult for you to fall asleep. So you want to really work with yourself there. Now, there's this idea of moving to a second location. For myself, that works really, really well because I come into wakeful awareness with the awareness that I'm not in my bed, and immediately that triggers me to, hey, I'm going to make attempts. So, other people use triggers like using for the second half of sleep or the second, the second sleep using a mask, which, the sense of it there as they're coming into wakefulness is a trigger that, oh, I'm going to make attempts. So, something to jog your memory. Now, besides that, you want to play with each of these techniques that I presented. I presented 7 of them, and there's even more than that. And just see which technique works for you. Ones you're going to resonate with, other ones not so much. Play with all of them, just in the meditative state, anytime during the day. Just lay down, just play with them, see which ones you resonate with. You're going to find the ones that really, work with you. And besides that, kind of keep in the back of your mind that the techniques that work for you today are not necessarily the techniques that will work for you. Perhaps the ones you didn't really like much in the beginning, maybe those are the ones that are going to become your favorite later. So don't completely abandon the other techniques. From time to time, mix it up a little bit. Of course, you really want to set intentions before going to sleep. Being Seth readers, you all know the power of setting an intention and the way it ripples up through the many levels of the self, particularly before going to sleep. Before your first sleep and definitely before your second sleep, you set an intention. You might even write out your intention on paper. Or what's really useful for me is you write out your protocol. Awake, separate with these 3 techniques. Then you do step 2. Write out the algorithm and then write out, cycle 1 is going to be these, cycle 2, cycle 3. So there's something about putting it on paper that keeps it more accessible because you're not in your full waking consciousness when you're in that in-between state. It's a little bit like you're not going to perhaps remember everything so clearly. So the more you commit it to, to some tangible form like writing, the easier it's going to be to remember when you really need it. So something that really works for me and works for a lot of people is keeping a journal. And in this journal, you're going to analyze your attempts. Some of my most fruitful times have been writing unsuccessful attempts. And I write it out, what I did, and I'm like, oh, well, I forgot to do this here. Oh, I could do this better. Oh, and I completely forgot about that. And so you kind of analyze and say, okay, well, I could do this, this, and this better. And that's how you train yourself to get into the algorithm a little bit better each time. Because you'll be surprised how much you modify things on your own until you kind of come back and say, oh, okay, I can do this, do this, do this. And over time, you just get really dialed in. Of course, asking yourself that question, what can I do better next time? Of course, you want to write down your successes because your successes create momentum. And beyond that, they become an interesting log over time. You can go back years later and read, out-of-body experience at such and such a date looked like this. Oh my God, now you have a little more life experience. Perhaps you've seen, perhaps it will speak to you in a completely different way than the experience spoke to you then. So if you ever want to do research on yourself or collaborate with others, it's good to write them down. You might even consider giving each of your OBEs a specific experience number that makes it easy to reference later. Now, something else that's really important is to create a plan of action. It's your plan of action that's going to inspire you to make your attempts. It's going to inspire you to put in the effort and to put in the energy and the focus. And so the plan of action is also going to give you a focus once you're out of body, because it's sort of like, okay, you get out and okay, now what, So have a plan of action, and the plan of action gives you something to do, but it also propels you to make the actual attempts. Question? Well, it's free will. You can get out of body and say, oh, the hell with that plan, that's stupid. You can do whatever you want. But it can give you a focus, because sometimes you get out of body and you're like, oh, plan of action. Okay, I'm going to look in the mirror. I'm going to go visit a friend. I'm going to hang out by the lake, whatever. It gives you a point of focus. It grounds you. But you can do whatever you want. Of course, if you find yourself in the Star Trek holodeck, you might think, everything I plan to do in here is out the window because now I want to do this. And that's totally fine, yeah. So some ideas, now that we're on this topic, like I've mentioned earlier, you can consider a visit with a dead relative if that has some meaning to you. You can consider visiting a place that maybe has a significance to you, or even travel to another planet if those of you who are, explorers of reality in various ways. Time travel is another kind of fun thing to consider. Some of you have favorite time periods you'd like to explore. Well, this is one way you get to vividly explore them in intricate detail. Something that might turn on others of you is finding a master to work with, dead or alive, whether it's a master of, a physical skill or a master of a spiritual skill. There's many masters you can think of to work with, and that's another idea. Some of you might like to explore the idea of finding medicines for physical ailments, because there's a certain way you can work with symbology and the out-of-body state. You're so open that the power of suggestion is incredibly powerful. And that's just another way to work with out-of-body states, is working with medicines. Even though you might externalize it to some degree, you still understand it. You're kind of materializing the medicine and taking it. It's almost like a visual form of an affirmation or suggestion, and that can have a really powerful effect. In terms of continuing tips and tricks, so you want to keep refining that algorithm, like I've been saying, as you write in your journal, and you just ask yourself the question, how can I do this better? You want to make sure you're following it exactly, and especially if you're not meeting with success, kind of go back and check the details. You might find you're skipping some important steps. And not last but not least, but something also incredibly important is you want to stay focused and stay on target. Sometimes things we get excited about are such that we create some momentum, but then within a week it kind of fizzles out a little bit. And so you want to keep the momentum going, but you don't want to overdo it in some sense. Like if you just practice 3 times a week, that should be plenty sufficient. Each morning gives you so many opportunities to make attempts that'll be still plenty of attempts. But you want to keep the momentum going, like beyond 1 week, into the second week, into the third week. And it really is cumulative. And you'll find that your success totally depends on quantity of attempts and then on quality of attempts. You're just learning a new skill. If you're going to learn to play the guitar, same thing. It takes a certain kind of focus and determination and dexterity, and eventually you get it. But it just takes, a little bit of focus to get there. And in case you're starved for a Seth quote, so he says, an almost automatic determination must be set up, however, if projections with conscious awareness are to be anything but rare oddities. Really underscoring just, it has to be important to you. Otherwise, sure, we all have plenty of spontaneous out-of-bodies just randomly throughout our lifetime. But if you really want to make it an art, you want to be the dream art scientist, you got to put a little bit of focus into it. Not that it's a lot of effort, because the funny thing is once you do it, it's incredibly easy, but it takes focus. So I believe effort is implying there's some resistance there, or you're struggling. But focus just means it has to really be important, a lot of intention. You do the techniques, and then it happens. If you do wake up with movement, you do not want to throw away the opportunity. And I know I stress, and the book that I've pulled this from stresses, how much you don't want to move upon awakening. But if you do move, just cycle the techniques anyway, because the techniques themselves are designed to bring you back into that in-between state. So, you don't want to waste that opportunity. And something else to consider is that as we're coming into wakefulness, many of us are actually in our phantom body or our out-of-body state. We're making motions that are actually completely phantom. And so you might think you've come into full waking consciousness, but you're actually still in that in-between state. And so based on that alone, you should make your attempts, because you never know. That might just be phantom movement you have awoken to. And I've had my mind play this trick on me many, many times, where I awaken and I'm like, oh, I'm just too awake, I'm just going to get up. And then it's only when I get up that I realize that I was completely in an in-between state, dreaming that I was awake. False awakenings, they happen. And so in case it is a false awakening, hey, you do your techniques and you'll be surprised that you'll catch many, many more experiences that way. So the other thing is you can train yourself to awaken without movement. Some people, and myself included, have found this piece to be a little bit challenging at first, because I just kind of wake up and just like we're just not trained to hover in that state. We just usually pass right through it. And so with a little bit of training, I found that I kind of float up into that state and just kind of float there, and then I have a lot of opportunity to play. Whereas before I would just kind of pop right up through it, then I'd have to kind of catch it back on the way down. So definitely, keep putting that intention in there, and you can train your body and mind basically to pretty much do anything. Now, if you have trouble separating from the body, you can actually skip the formal separation part, and that's really nice to know. And so you can go right into a translocation technique or disapparation for you Harry Potter fans out there. You can just translocate or disapparate directly right out of the body, which is nice. So instead of formal separation, like crawling out of your body, rolling out, levitation, you can actually literally just, boom, go from, you realize the technique is working. You see those signs and indicators that it's working. You can use a translocation technique and skip separation, which is kind of nice because there's just some mornings where just separation is just, it just ain't happening. So there's nice to know you have this other tool. And this is one of my favorite ways, actually, is one way is you close your eyes, your etheric eyes, because your physical ones are closed. You set a strong intention of where you're going to be. When you open them, and boom, you find yourself in that location. That's one translocation technique. Another one is that you quickly, immediately, and fully visualize yourself in another location. This is very much like the target techniques that William Buhlman alludes to in his books, but you do it with incredible intention, incredible force, if you will. And you'll find that that can take you right out of the body, and you can skip the formal separation phase. And then another one is that you quickly, immediately, fully immerse yourself in a visual kinesthetic act, such as running, or jogging, or any of those other activities that you're familiar with. That can take you right out too. Then you don't have to go back to the body and separate formally if that is a challenge to you. Now, upon returning to the body, always try again, make another attempt, and it's incredibly easy to pop back in if you've just returned from an out-of-body state, because you're in the optimal state. So, you got to use that opportunity. So with that, you can have numerous re-entries, and this is pretty exciting when you've had an out-of-body experience, you return back to physical consciousness, and you just say, hey, I'm going to do it again, and boom, out you go. You come back into physical awareness, and boom, out you go again. It's pretty fun. So upon a return to the body, you want to just basically repeat the process as if you've just woken up out of a dream. You attempt separation again, and if not, you can cycle the techniques as needed. Now, probably the most important, certainly the most important for me, and probably the most important for many people, is you really want to learn to relax through the whole process. And so you want to relax in a sense of being completely easy about all of this. You want to have make this a playful adventure, and certainly not a painful one. You don't want to make it that your happiness depends on the outcome. Rather, just take joy in the actual exercises themselves. Because even if you don't go out of body, you're going to experience some fantastic sensations of your consciousness moving into the etheric plane, as well as your starting even like a partial separation is going to feel pretty exhilarating. And the other hand is you start to see visuals and imagery as you do the visual techniques, and those are pretty entertaining just in and of themselves. So you really want to just find the joy in the process and not so much be so goal-oriented. So with that, you want to stay really focused but relaxed through the process. You want to totally let it be okay if you get out or not. You don't want to have too much writing on it. And it's also really important to honor your sleep cycles, because if you disturb your sleep cycles too much, eventually some party is going to kind of start rebelling and saying like, this stuff, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired all the time. And so you want to honor your sleep cycle and just kind of tweak it a little bit like we saw in those charts. And then all of a sudden, just about every morning becomes a potential portal into these incredible, mysterious spaces. So with that, it's really important not to push the river, as we sometimes say, but just allow it to flow and savor the process. And through all, respect yourself, respect your sleep cycles as you do this. And so with that, hopefully, I will be seeing some of you on the other side. Yeah, I'll upload the PowerPoint to my website and then you can just download it from there. So now you're probably wondering, okay, so what do we do once we get out of body? Besides those plans of actions that I've described earlier, there's also like how to stabilize the state. So once you're out, you want to what I'd like to call deepen, and this is how Michael Radiga in his book describes it, deepening the state. The idea basically here is you want to really tune your inner senses right into that specific frequency of perception. Now, if you don't deepen, here's what's going to happen. You're going to tend to have a much shorter experience. You might have some sudden and unwanted returns to the body. You just kind of get snapped back into the physical. Or you might find yourself in a relatively chaotic experience where you know you're in an out-of-body state, but you're lacking clarity and focus. And so deepening basically is like tuning a radio dial, for those of you who are old enough to remember tuning radio dials. Tuning any kind of analog station, you're just kind of finding that sweet spot where the visual or the auditory image just gets really clear. So how does one deepen? Basically, like I said, it's a way of focusing yourself right into that out-of-body state, that specific state of mind. Just like tuning a radio, you're going to be tuning yourself into this state of mind and therefore stabilizing it, making it more tangible and real. And the effect of this is that everything around you just begins to kind of crystallize, become more vivid, more clear. And you can go from a kind of murky, kind of sense perception reality to like being about as real as physical reality. And you can keep deepening to the point it becomes like super real, like a super experience where reality seems to be even more than what the 5 physical senses can provide you. Basically, you're dialing into this really specific and stabilizing this. You're creating the stable reality construction once you're out of body. And so the effect of it is your blurry vision gets clear, your hearing becomes more acute, your body, your etheric body becomes quick, mobile, it becomes light, it becomes incredibly responsive to your thought and movement, and your mind becomes incredibly clear. And how does one deepen? Basically, once out, you just immediately begin to palpate your surroundings. So if I just got out of body, what I would do is like I'll reach for the podium and start feeling into it, really turning on that feeling sense. I'd start using my eyes and looking at the detail. But the trick with deepening is you don't want to just like hold this here and be like, mm-hmm. You actually want to really participate in it and keep it active. Because sometimes if you just get really passive in the out-of-body state, you'll just start drifting back into physical. There's a considerable pull towards the physical, so you want to kind of create a pull in the other direction, and that's what you're doing with deepening. So one excellent technique actually is to rub your hands, because it's immediately kinesthetic and visual at the same time. Or you can palpate your surroundings around you just the same. So you keep feeling, keep moving, taking in more, and staying active with that. You can use your visual eyes to scrutinize objects. Once you've materialized or you find a wall or something to grab a hold of. And you're basically just really tuning those inner senses to that perception. And usually that kinesthetic visual ones are the ones that are really going to help stabilize and crystallize the reality you found yourself in. And just like I keep saying, like I love this analogy. It really feels like you're just tuning into that reality. That this picture just kind of goes, and it becomes super clear. And so with that, some plans of action just to kind of rev up the desire portion of the equation. And this is we're close to the last slide for the timekeepers out there. Like I said earlier, visiting a master, dead or alive. Something that I find particularly fun is playing with your pet in an out-of-body state. You cat lovers, dog lovers, you can have some pretty serious fun there. You can visit a past or a future home, a mate, friend, business associate. You can make peace, or you can explore future probabilities. There's a lot of potential there. You can visit mythical places. If you're fond of Hogwarts or Minas Tirith or Mount Olympus or any mythical place, those can be visited as well. You can practice reality construction by and far. This is one of my favorites, is materializing and dematerializing energy. Perhaps it's because I work as a healer. Oftentimes I'm working with the property of materializing and dematerializing stagnations within the body or causing change as I work on my patients. When I'm in an out-of-body state, I'm practicing that mental, that mind state where I'm bringing things into focus, materializing, and then causing dematerialization. There's something about that really speaks to me. And of course, there's many, many more. And even the sky is not the limit, because literally you're in a limitless, full potential, anything's fair game to explore state of mind. Just as a brief review, you want to use the indirect method for easy access. Upon awakening, you want to go immediately into separation techniques and then cycle the techniques for creating and inducing the in-between state. Once you're out of body, make sure to deepen, 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 because that's what's going to help you stay in that state quite a bit longer. And then a plan of action can help you, motivate you, inspire you, give you something to do while out. And then don't forget attempting re-entry once you return to the body. It gives you a lot more mileage out of the state. And so if you want to read a little bit more, I have many articles posted as well as last year's video. And I'm going to post this outline as well on my website, so you'll be able to download it there. And so with that, I have this idea of giving a talk next year, which is going to include going over advanced techniques while out of body, because I like following this progression. So if Lawrence will ask me back, that would be the plan. And so with that, I'd like to close by saying, let's all really practice, put these techniques to use so that we can all push the limits, push the boundaries, push the leading edge of our own understanding about ourselves and the universe. And also just, start to share our experiences as a community to create group social momentum, and so that we can also learn from each other, sharing our experiences with each other. I really look forward to taking this art to a whole new level, personally myself, but also just seeing it be more ubiquitous, not just in spiritual circles, but even, like I said earlier at the start of the talk, within scientific circles even, just as a way to explore these different states of mind. And so with that, if you want to stay connected to me, I do have a mailing list form over there. I send out an article about once a month about these types of topics. I also have OBE lecture CDs on the back over there if you're interested in that. And just to reiterate, I do have an acupuncture energy medicine practice in San Jose. I also sometimes teach out-of-body classes privately or in groups and lead retreats. And so, if any of that sounds interesting to you, look me up. And, if you have experiences to share, definitely stay connected, and hopefully we can have some more sharing going on. So with that, thank you. And I will be back up here again leading a meditation. So somebody asked if I could share some personal experiences. Maybe that could be the time we can open up for that kind of discussion. And perhaps by tomorrow morning, some of you will have some things to share too. So thank you.